Welcome to the Daily BA. My name is Ryan O. Today we're going to cover the standard acceleration chart. We're going to talk about why charting on this chart is going to be useful to understand human behavior, including yours and the clients that you may serve out there. So I have a presentation that I'm going to show you some real world examples of data that I've included that are both of past situations where I was tracking others, clients for example, or my own self-management behavior. So let's jump into it. So we talked about previously on another episode of this channel, my self-management package, which essentially was you clarify your values. There's ways in which we can go about doing that I've talked about previously. It's linked up above. Goal setting practices, again, covered in that video. And then your daily committed action. That's one that we're going to pull apart today. So how do you start to measure your daily committed action? And my point that I made in the previous video was that measuring these things is how you align your values, your goals, your daily committed action, and you are successful at self-management and hopefully also feel like you're living a valued life. So what happens oftentimes, these get shooken up. And the only way I know how to personally fix this myself in my own life is to, again, measure what's going on in my life, use that measurement to help align my values, goals, and the world around me through my behavior. So we're going to talk today specifically about precision measurement. Precision teaching is what it was commonly called. There's been a little bit of a call to action the last 5 or 6 years to call it precision measurement because you can apply this in a bunch of different areas. Precision teaching was the primary area, but precision medicine, precision construction, like you name it, you could use this in that area. So first of all, if you Google image search, this is a fantastic slide. My buddy Stu made this. If you Google image search and you look for graph, what do you get? Look at all of these. So you got some line graphs, some bar graphs, you got some pie charts, you got these stacked ones in the corner. You have, I don't even know what this is. This is just a complete mess of something probably fantastic that I wish I understood. But the point is you get a lot of variability. There's a lot of different things that are out there. Now we're taught in behavior analysis that there's some fundamentals to understanding through visual analysis what's going on with data. First of all, you have level. I've indicated it here. Now level is the value on the vertical axis scale around which a set of measurements converge. So on this one we have 0 on the left, 9 is our top count, and you can see I drew a level for each of these different areas. Baseline, the first one is sitting around 2, the next one, the level for treatment, sitting around 6, the next one it's sitting again around 2, and if we go back to the last phase, that TX treatment phase, is going to be sitting around 7. This level that tells us, again, the value on the vertical axis, the scale around which a set of measures converge. This is our level. Now, we also have to look at what we call trend. Now, a trend is a relatively consistent change in the data in a single direction. This trend we can see by me drawing these 3 different lines here. These were hand drawn. There was no quarter intersect method or anything fancy here, just hand drawn. All right, typically you need 3 or 4 data points at least to be making these. We're going to get into a little bit of that later on. So baseline, trending downward, treatment, trending upward, baseline. The second one, hard to actually draw because you only have 1 dot, so there's just a dash there. And then treatment on the last one, slightly going down. All right, now our third area would be variability, the frequency and degree to which multiple measures yield different outcomes. All right, so I drew in boxes here how we would start to look at and try to understand variability, how much it is bouncing and going up and down and up and down. All right, so you can see there's a moderate amount of variability relative to the other treatment phases here. In the first phase, the second one, the treatment has more variability actually. We have very little. Again, this is hard with that 1 data point. And then we'd go back and we'd say that there's a little bit less variability in this last one. Now, this level, trend, and variability, inherent with it is what we call baseline logic. Now, these control procedures sound scary. What it is just some sort of way to ensure that the behavior program is being implemented correctly and that you acknowledge what those things are so that you can potentially track them for any confounding variables. All right. So if I had a self-management procedure, this one was blog post completed. What's going on is I have certain things such as a goal setting strategy, maybe in the treatment, that starts to affect what's going on. That could be a control procedure. All right. There's a whole slew of them. Big topic. You can jump into that. I can link down below where you learn that. But control procedures are used within the subject, meaning we don't need anybody else to assess the effectiveness of this intervention. We can simply use our own behavior, such as I did here, of a baseline, how many I wrote, and then going back to baseline, and then how many I wrote when I started to have a weekly goal setting procedure of 7 per week or 1 per day. All right, you can see that this worked. Now, you can identify relations that are meaningful to the individual. That's what I just described. I was trying to figure out at this point in my life, how do I blog more consistently? And this was a way in which I was able to do it. And I was sure that it was working because I went back to baseline, I removed the goal setting, and my behavior went back down. All right, so that goal functioned individually for me to help influence my behavior. That is really, really valuable information. Now, you can also scale up the findings in a group or big data. It's a little bit more complex, but what you can do is you can actually bring all of this individual data into group analyses, all right? Super valuable because oftentimes people are looking at the group behavior, but not looking at the individual. Whereas if you were to look at the individual behavior specifically, then you can build up and scale up from there without having to do the work twice because your measures were set for individual at first. Fantastic. This is what this sort of stuff goes on in artificial intelligence, machine learning, social media platforms like this. Like they look at the individual behavior and start to scale those up into larger groups. Now, there's a question. Describe the effect of the graph and the effect of the treatment. I kind of described this to you already, but what we would do is we'd look at the level, trend, and variability for each of these. Now, so let's look at this a different way. So we have level, trend, and variability. Let's look at this graph. All right, triangles. What's the level, trend, and variability? Look at it. Dots. What's the level, trend, and variability here? Remember retaining that knowledge of the level, trend, variability that we discussed earlier in this video. So the dots, I would say low level at first, then it gets higher. So they were here on the axis, but now they're up here. The trend is upward. We have an upward trend going on here. And then also the variability, a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to kind of describe, but there's some variability going on here, right? If I had those kind of windows like we had before. All right, so I'm going to show you this graph. I'm going to show you a bunch of other graphs too. Check all of these out. So we've got a lot of them. Now, if I were to ask you what's the level, the trend, or the variability, you can pause this and you can look at these. And what I ask of you is look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. What's the level, trend, and variability? Notice here that there's something really, really interesting. Remember that first rule? So when you're visually analyzing data that you should look at level, trend, and variability? Well, it's a good start, but we could probably do better. And the reason being, if we go back, is that all of these graphs are the exact same data. My friend Cameron made these. Exact same data. But you'll notice here that the level, trend, and variability starts to alter as a result of us stretching and moving them around. So they're either made larger on the PowerPoint or the axes were changed. So this one's at 100, 100, 100, but these are at 35, 40, 35, and 35. So stretching these proportions actually changes the level, trend, and variability. So that first rule is a good start, but we could probably do better. And the big issue here is my high is your low, is there maybe better? I don't know. Like we're using these loosey-goosey terms, for lack of a better description. And it's purely based off of just subjective experience, when the whole point of this is that we're taking data-based decision making and we're supposed to be using that to leverage to help our clients out. So there's actually more to this issue. So what I have here is an add subtract graph. So what I mean by that is that every time we have another notch, we're going up 2 instances or 2 counts of that specific response. Now across the bottom, successive calendar days. When we chart this behavior pattern out, what we see is an exponential curve. Turns out these are super hard to predict. If I were going to ask you where this is going to keep going, you might be able to guess somewhere up here, but an accuracy at the level of analysis that we require in a science, this is extremely hard visually. But with one small change, that is changing this x-axis to a multiply divide. So now what's going on is every time you multiply by 10, it increases. All right, so instead of add subtract, we're now on a multiplicative by 10, a log base 10. What happens here, same successive calendar days, is that same exact data, this is the same data, is now visually represented as a straight, nice, succinct line. This is something I could visually analyze and I could predict with much more accuracy visually. So, precision teaching was founded by this gentleman, Ogden Lindsley. I actually have this fantastic poster that I can lay over here that we made that's in the shop. That's just, it embodies the greatness that Og was. Now, he had 4 guiding principles. The first one being the learner knows best. And what we mean by this is the behavior of the learner is going to demonstrate what is going on, what is influencing them in the environment, all right? So they might not have the subject matter knowledge or expertise to be able to help themselves out, but their behavior is going to tell you what's going on. And if you analyze that with them and work with them to do that, then you're starting from a very solid foundation. So the learner knows best. Follow their data. Next one, focus on observable behavior. These are things that must be measured. They don't have to be measured by somebody else. It can be measured by yourself. And this brings up the question of, what about thoughts, feelings, these sort of things that other people can't measure or verify? Those are acceptable in the field of precision measurement. So the observable behavior doesn't have to necessarily be observable by somebody else, but you have to understand how to accurately measure and make sure that you have a valid count of the behavior as it's occurring. The next one would be the use of frequency as a measure. Frequency implies time. There's a count over time. This could be a count per minute, a count per hour, a count per day, per week, per month, per year, per decade, per century. These are counts that have some sort of unit, fundamental unit of time. This is consistent with natural science, the ways that we look at things in physics, chemistry, biology, etc. There has to be time involved. Now, the last one, the display of your data and making database decisions using the good old standard acceleration chart. I'm going to show you an electronic and then some of the paper ones later on. All right, so let's jump into what the standard acceleration chart is. This is it in all of its glory. So any human performance can be charted on this chart. Any human performance. Now, the process of precision measurement is encapsulated in these 4 different things that you're going to do: pinpoint, record, change, and try again. As soon as you try again, you're back to the beginning. Pinpoint, record, change again. Now, we're going to go through and describe these. So think of something that you could do, maybe something that you want to do faster. Let's say, for example, we have a client that's tying their shoe. This was a fantastic example developed by one of my great colleagues and mentors in the field that really shaped my thinking. So you have a student that's trying to learn how to tie his shoe. You know, mom's in a rush. We need to get this up to independence so we can get out the door, get you to school, if that's a thing still at this point where you're at. So let's pretend that we measure this. This little dot just showed up here. This little dash just showed up here saying that we're going to measure for 2 minutes. So we watch this child and we measure for 2 minutes, and it takes him exactly 2 minutes to tie his shoes. Now let's take my buddy Mark, for example. It takes him 6 seconds. You can see here the red dot. That's how long it takes him. The difference between the two is the difference between 2 minutes and between these 6 seconds. Now, what I could do here is I could actually predict, if I was trying to teach this child, using something like this fan. I would say, let's say that I'm trying to reach at an average of doubling the learner's performance every week. That's become the standard practice, expectations of what a teacher should be able to teach at in precision measurement. And I take that and I predict out. So here is my buddy Mark's fluent performance, and here is the ×2 that I should be expecting per week. With this sort of science, like measuring behavior in this sort of way, I can predict down to the week and even the day that I will have that learner at that rate if I'm using effective teaching practices. Remember, the learner knows best. I can't blame the learner. I can't say it's their fault. By using the practices that I understand in a behavioral science approach to educating people, I would be able to hit that. And I should be able to be expected from the people that are providing those services, or the people that expect those services or paying for those services, that I should be able to render those services effective by delivering on that date. Sounds a little crazy, but this is exactly what the precision teaching community does. They can give money back guarantees, I kid you not, that they'll be able to do these sort of things. Imagine that if you had that education system, right? So this little A is an aim, and it's where we're trying to reach. And I'd say, hey, all right, buddy, let's say it's Johnny. Johnny, on this date, that's when we're scheduling your showdown, all right? And this showdown is we're going to go try to whoop my buddy Mark's butt at tying your shoes. So I could count these, the exact number of weeks that it would take. So I could say you could expect this to be achieved in 10 weeks. These are things that are often arbitrarily selected in the field of behavior analysis and in educational settings where people say that they'll achieve X amount across a year or across a month, I can do a database decision process off that learner's current behavior with a chart like this. So what that brings us into next is that there's different learning pictures. There's only so many ways that behavior can actually occur, and different patterns that can occur when you're measuring behavior on these. So we have one here. The dots are things you want to go up. The X's are things you want to go down. This would be a great example of JAWS, right? Something that is a perfect picture that we would want to see. The acceleration target of the dots going up, the deceleration of the X's going down. Beautiful. Now I could have some others here. So I'm going to drop up the 9 or so possible. And we'll note here that there's only so many ones that you can have. This is them in totality. Generally speaking, the ones up top are all improving learning pictures. All the ones here are worsening learning pictures, in which I need to do something immediately to help that student out. And then all these others are maintaining. Now, depending on the specific thing that you are teaching, you would have a learning picture. After teaching for a week or two, you would look at it and you'd be like, okay, relative to my goal, are we improving, worsening, or maintaining? Maintaining or worsening requires intervention. Improving, generally speaking, depending on the growth rate, means that your effective practices need to stay in place. So this brings up the concept of like, okay, so I can start to look at learning pictures, I can measure this way. It sounds pretty tedious and a lot of work. Like, what's the point of this? And we would argue that it is fluency. Now, typically everything is measured through like a percentage correct. If you look back on your educational history, it was that. Maybe it was even weirder categories of satisfactory, unsatisfactory, etc. Now, the problem with this is that two students can be at 100% but perform very differently. If you note back on our example, the learner, Johnny, that was tying his shoe in 2 minutes, and Mark, my buddy, that was tying it in 6 seconds, were both 100%. You would never be able to discern the difference between the two if you were to just simply look at percentage correct. And there's actually huge issues that occur when you're looking at this across the totality of the education system of what we actually teach. All right, it is an arbitrarily selected measure that has nothing to do actually with the behavior itself. It's just a derivative of behavior that is essentially useless, but it seems to be a standard of practice that we have selected. Now, true mastery from precision measurement would be a combination of accuracy or quality plus speed. So students perform easily in the face of distraction, retaining the skills over longer periods of time, and it can apply what they have learned to acquire to real life situations. Fluency, that is the target, the goal of a precision measurement teaching strategy, that we want fluent performance. Something that will be selected, works in the environment in which you need to naturally apply it, and you can do it in the face of distractions every single time. All right, and the fantastic thing is that research in precision measurement has consistently shown that it is the speed or rate of performance which measurably distinguishes experts from beginners. All right, experts versus beginners. So our entire educational system, using percentage correct, isn't looking at the knowledge, the body of research that shows what is actually an effective measurement practice to be able to discern whether or not somebody is performing at the levels that they need to be successful. At this point, that should scare the living shit out of you if it hasn't already. Now, what is next is we need some sort of a way to graph this. And they chose the standard acceleration chart, and they chose it for a few different reasons. First of all, it was empirically investigated as to what was the best way. So they designed it in a way to where they could measure, like I said, anything that occurs between 1 time per day to 1,000 times per minute in somebody's life. So it can encompass essentially the totality of behavior that you engage in within a certain period of time. Additionally, they also looked at the color. They went down to the color of the graph to ensure that the color was something that was easy and readable for people. But I would say the largest utility in this is actually the standardization factor. So the fact that everybody would use the same chart to be able to measure and graph things allows you some really useful things. So, for example, here's some different behavior patterns. Types words, reads pages, interacts with employees, checks phone, brushing and showering, different steps taken throughout the day, such as my walking around, delivering employee feedback, These were all things that I had to do at the time when I developed this. This was a management role and some different things were going on in my life. Now, you'll note here that each of these kind of have these areas in which this behavior lives. And when I say lives, it's because of this multiply divide factor. These behaviors consistently occur around these areas. And what's absolutely fascinating about this is that when I say behavior lives on a chart, these bands that I just showed, these bands are all different areas where essentially my behavior is occurring. I get to know myself through this. But what's fascinating is that everybody's behavior starts to really overlap in certain areas. So we know, for example, that if I'm trying to teach a child how to read, that I need to get their reading roughly between 100 and 120 words per minute to obtain fluent reading speeds. This is consistent across different age groups, different cultural backgrounds, different situations, where they're getting educated, different grades. That range is something that allows fluency when you get to that point. It's absolutely amazing. I'm going to include a link down below of a bunch of different areas that we've measured and understood this for. So the point of this is to bring back into values, goal setting, and your measured daily action. Values and goal setting we talked about in the previous video, but this measured action, this is how I go about it. And I'm going to show you a few examples about how I've done this in the past right now. So hopefully at this point you notice my sweet Who Charted shirt. This is not the nerdiest shirt I own. I don't know what is. Buddy Stu made these. I don't know if they're for sale. Fantastic dude. Okay, so a few different examples here of different client data. Specifically, I'm going to go through some of the client stuff that I worked with in the past, helping teach people different things and some reflective stuff on my own behavior. So the first one here, we're going to orient to this. I actually split this graph up for some utility and so I didn't waste a bunch of paper. So I have different things here. Dolch words that the student needed to learn. There was 5 different levels. So the primer, another set of primer, Dolch first, Dolch second, Dolch third. Different words can be known at different grades. Way to kind of measure and look at how the student's performing essentially. This was a child with autism. They were expected to see the word and say it. So learning the basics of reading. So see, say, Dolch words. Dots correct, X is incorrect. You'll see here that all of these were the same week. I took a baseline measure, that is, how did the student perform on them? You can see the learning picture was pretty good for the first one, but as we progressed, he did not know any of those words. And then what we did is we spent an entire week teaching as fast as we possibly could these different Dolch words through strategies, not of teaching this specific word, but teaching basic strategies of how to pronounce letters, different phonetic sounds, etc. And what we were able to do there is start to see a drastic change in the number per correct that the student was able to say across all of these. Fantastic, really quick learner, just didn't have the right instructional strategies oftentimes being implemented to affect his behavior. And then we did a follow-up a couple weeks later to be able to understand whether or not that these were maintaining, and again, fantastic results. So, standard acceleration chart for the win. All right, so this next learner really struggled with aggressive behavior. What I say is, imagine someone's 8 or 9 years old, punching, hitting, kicking, biting, like upwards of every 1 to 2 minutes on a really bad day was how frequently this behavior was occurring. Really hard to teach anything instructionally, and the child was falling behind drastically. Now, one thing that was going on was a lot of like ruminating thoughts around and like perseverating sort of thoughts around their brother and what was going on in their life at that time. And so one of the strategies that I read about in the research was trying to get them to positively talk about the things around them. So if you're constantly focusing on negativity, if you can switch to finding the positives and talking about those, sometimes you can get behavior to change and even correlates sometimes if those sort of things are connected in a way. So if the behavior of the cursing, yelling, hitting, screaming, things like that are prerequisites to the aggression, sometimes focusing on the verbal behavior itself can start to affect the aggressive behavior in this case. So that was kind of the assumption, what we tried to do here. And so we'll see that we have 2 different things. The dots are the number of positive statements said about one's family members. The X's are the number of negative statements said about the family members. And then the aggression are the squares. So what we have going on here Baseline, we just look at what's going on. The number of negatives were increasing by 1.7 times per week. I can actually calculate that because of the standardized measure. I have no growth on the positive words stated about family members, and I have a slight decrease, but more so, it was just kind of that it would bounce up and down depending on the day of the week, where aggressive behavior was occurring roughly every 1 to 5 minutes. 1 to 5 minutes. It was insane, impacting this student's life like crazy. Now, this provided one-time model was the next phase. So what I tried to do here is just provide one time a model of here's how you could say positive statements. So this was a 1-minute implementation of I said 1 minute worth of positive statements about the learner's brother. Think about things as like, man, he's the one that I get to hang out with. We get to play video games. Sometimes I like that, he plays with me. Sometimes I like that he brings a new game to me. Like things that were focused around just anything positive that the student could say about their sibling. Now what happened here is functionally no change. We had a little bit of a decrease in the negatives, but they were continuing to rise over the week. The positives, I had a couple exemplars, but nothing happened there. And then again, the aggressive behavior was roughly at the same level, and it wasn't changing in the trend or the variability. We were still in that 1 to 5, roughly aggression every 1 to 5 minutes. And then what we did is we did 2 novel exemplars per day. So the assumption is that maybe we had to teach different exemplars of different positive things that you could say. So oftentimes what this was is we were watching or talking with the mother or watching during the drop-off about interactions that occurred and getting some information about what happened the night before from the mother. And what we were able to do during that is we were able to start to provide real-world examples of things that happened positively the day before or that morning to help provide those examples. So 2 novel examples of what to say per day about one's siblings. And what we saw was a drastic change in this about the 3rd or 4th day. So the 3rd day we were increasing, we had a break for a few days, and then for 3 consecutive weeks we saw increases in the positive statements. Now the big question here is the positive statements, do they translate over to aggression? And do we see the negatives decrease? So the negatives decrease. This line above here essentially means that they were having there was no longer any sort of negative comments being said. So those decreased, the positive statements increase is exactly what we're looking for. And then the fantastic, amazing thing that happened here, this doesn't happen with everybody according to the research, but we had a decrease in aggressive behaviors. Now, this did not get them completely down to where we wanted to. So if no aggressive behaviors were happening, they'd be happening down here. He was in class for approximately 6 hours a week across these days. So we were still having aggressive outbursts roughly every 25 to 30 to 40 minutes. Kind of depending on what was going on. Every 20 to 30 minutes is what I should say there. But we had significant improvements. Like that allowed for 15, 20-minute blocks of instruction to start occurring where we never even got there previously. So this produced like dividends on the ability for our treatment to start being effective in other areas as well. So what we did is we stopped those novel exemplars. They held for a week. There was a large break in the calendar for a winter break sort of thing, or spring break, can't remember exactly when it was. And then the retention check, did they maintain and did the behavior maintain? And this was fantastic. Looking at this 4-week break in behavior maintaining, most people talk about how you have the resurgence of behavior after breaks in the school system. Real functionally good programming can solve for those sort of things. This required us just communicating with the mother to work on positive statements. And remember, this is 1 minute per day that we're providing 2 novel exemplars, and we're seeing whether or not it continues. That was just to teach it. During the break, it was just you could use the same sort of examples. We didn't say, use the same exact ones every day, but like the novel examples per day didn't necessarily matter. Like it was just pick a couple of positive things, have them start saying them, get that going for a minute, and that 1 minute per day would set trajectory for significant decreases in aggression. So fantastic. One of the coolest things, I actually submitted this to a research journal and I never heard back from them, and I never submitted to a research journal again. If there's a reason I don't do research, it's partially because of that. All right, so this next one was really interesting. It was a research project. We were going back and looking at the pseudoscientific treatments, different fad treatments for autism. Just going back into the literature, we went back. This one is a successive calendar years and a total count. And so we went back all the way into roughly 1942, where we saw the first documented case and suggested treatment for helping somebody with autism-like features manifesting in their behavior. Now, the proper diagnostic system and what happened there was much later, but there was actually a lot going on talking about traits that people would see in behavior that was labeled autistic across this time before it made it into our diagnostic system. And so this one, what we see is the two ways to graph this. The X are the number of pseudoscientific treatments that like showed up in the market, in the literature, right, that people were offering. So you can see that these were happening more and more frequently across decades, all the way into the 2000s. So this variability, this bounce growing, actually shows us that we have far more treatments being presumably thrown out there. Another way to look at this is a cumulative number of treatments, which is just this, all the X's are just regraphed for that cumulative in the dots here. And so the predictive value of the standard acceleration chart is really set for these daily or yearly counts in this case. They're not set for cumulative, so it's really hard to predict off of this with accuracy, but this measure, because it's a true frequency measure, is something we could start to predict off of. So you'd start to get somewhere between 1 and 5 new pseudoscientific treatments occurring in the literature roughly. Now, I looked at this at around 2012 or so. I have not looked since then. And there's only a few. Now, the thing is that there's only a few really evidence-based approaches. And these are treatment packages, usually based on behavioral principles. One is an early intensive behavioral intervention. There's some others that are coming out. They're kind of repackaged, bring in some different things. But roughly speaking, the over 50 pseudoscientific treatments were gaining unbelievable speed across the 20th century, when in reality, and continuing in the 21st, when in reality there was only that 1 or 2 kind of treatment packages that were effective in helping people. And man, if this isn't like a saddening chart that's out there, I don't know what it is. This is people's hopes and dreams for their students and their livelihood to be able to help them out, just potentially being completely wasted because it's not effective. Another one that I looked at was for a period of time I would chart different things in my environment, try to get an understanding of what's going on. This one was the number of self-commitments that I was stating and following. And I completed this with another colleague, so they were interested in looking at them. I looked at mine as well for a little while. I did not maintain this for very long, as you can see, but the dots are the number of self-commitments made. The X's are the number that are actually, dots are made in statements that I made and I followed. X's are the number that I state and that I actually don't follow. I'm someone that likes to make a lot of self-commitments. This could be something like, I'm going to wake up and brush my teeth in the morning. Like if you're looking to shape something that simple, which is something I still work on, making sure I'm consistent on certain activities of daily living like that. But it could also be something like, I'm going to write that report, or I'm going to call that person I haven't talked to in a while, like self-commitments of things you're going to do that day. Now, I'm a little overambitious oftentimes, and I state more than I can do. But the point here is, do you get some sort of correspondence when you state these things? And oftentimes, graphing them will be enough to learn about your behavior if you understand the basics of level trend variability, how to chart, and look at your own behavior. So what I learned here, I make a lot of statements. Sometimes I follow them, sometimes I don't. Roughly speaking, if I had a couple days of too many that I wasn't following, that's probably where I should start to maybe work with a colleague or consider some sort of intervention to help keep me on track. All right, so another thing that we could potentially look at on a daily at that time period was the number of fiction and nonfiction. I'm pretty good at reading nonfiction every day roughly. I'll take days off, but I'm pretty good at reading a lot of nonfiction works that are out there. And so the dots are the number of pages of nonfiction that I was reading. Roughly, it looks like my bounce here, I kind of average between 10 and 50 pages per day, which is, think about an article or two per day if you're reading research articles, or you're reading about a book every 2 weeks on average is usually what I get through, sometimes 3 weeks. Now, one thing that I wouldn't do, though, is I wouldn't read a lot of fiction. I wasn't reading a lot of fun, interesting fictional stories. And so I actually tracked those. This is something I've tracked numerous times, but they're at 0. I didn't read a single page of fiction across this roughly 3-month period. And I can roll this up as we call it sometimes. You roll it up into a weekly chart. So this is the same data. You can see here there's none that I was reading for fiction per week. The previous one was days, now it's weeks. But I was having a pretty good increase off of this intervention is just charting my behavior at reading more and more pages per week. And so I was starting to get from roughly around 100 to 200 per week, and I moved that up quite quickly, probably at times 3 or 4 acceleration on how quickly it grew from month to month, or roughly a 5 times acceleration. So it was at roughly 100 at the end of the first month, but now it's roughly at 5 times that at 500 per month is what I was reading, just as a product of self-charting and tracking it. It's really fantastic. I look at this one every once in a while. I don't do it consistently. I read plenty and far more than I probably need to when it comes to nonfiction. And I've actually read a couple. I've read a couple fiction books in the last month as well. So yeah, interesting. Now these can get super messy sometimes. So this one is a really interesting one where I was trying to understand different metrics around behavior that I would call healthy, working out, things like that. Now, this is not unconventional in charting it the way that I did. Behavior is something you're supposed to be able to see, measure, count, right? It has to live in this frequency. Something like your calories burnt, which is what sometimes people look at, I was looking at them, is something that I find valuable, but it's not behavior. So remember that. Remember, I kind of bent the rules on this one a little bit. But what I tracked is I would look at the duration that I was running. So this is the duration of which my first mile took me to complete. So I'm a pretty slow runner at this time in my life. I was really out of shape, and it was taking me about 14 minutes per mile, and I got that down to roughly 9-minute miles as a result of this program across, again, about 4 months. My total duration of the workout I would look at, so not just how fast was I running in my first mile, but how fast was I, or how long was I running for the total duration? So how much cardio was I getting in? That's the slash with the circles here. Now, this particular time period, what I was doing is I was getting ready for one of those mud runs. And so I signed up for Nike Plus. There's a little line here. It's kind of faded. And I set how many miles per day on the days per week that it said I should be running to be able to get ready for a general, strong 5K sort of running program, something like that. So this was the number of days that I ran, the number of days that I followed. I was actually in grad school at the time. It was the last thing I was prioritizing. I was trying to reorganize my priorities by charting this sort of stuff. I did good the first few weeks, but all of these dots that are empty are dots that I should have ran in days that I didn't end up running. And so all of those were failed. This actually resulted in me being sick at this time period for a couple weeks. I didn't run at all for those and exercise whatsoever. And this led to me kind of quickly trying to catch up before that mud run. I remember dying on this one. But yeah, sometimes you fall completely flat on your face, but you still achieve your goals of accomplishing whatever it was, like finishing that mud run. And then calories burnt. Again, this was something I was interested in looking at, how many calories I was burning per session. I got those up pretty consistently in the beginning when running consistently around 500 to 600 calories burnt per session. And then it started to fall off again as a result of my sickness. So ways in which you can understand the behavior around you maybe affect your behavior, such as through running. And I've got one more. This is my last one. This one's really, really interesting. So again, this is one that was kind of bending out of the norm. I was trying to understand if I was getting faster when it came to how fast I was snowboarding down the mountain. And so this is something where I rode roughly once or twice per week. Roughly once per week at this time, now looking at this. And I would chart how many vertical feet I was snowboarding. And I was really curious out of how many lifts that I was completing, if I could get more and more vertical feet completed per session. So could I get faster on my snowboard and get more turns in, essentially. And so I have vertical feet are the dots. So 9,000, 13, 6,000, 10,000, 25,000, 12,000, a lot of vertical feet going on here. And it was vertical feet per minute is what I charted it as. So I had a total here, is what I was just reading you. But you'll see that, for example, this 25,000 day is actually lower than this 10,000 day. Even though I completed 25,000 vertical feet, it is lower on the chart. than this 10,000 day. And what that was is I completed more, but it was across a longer duration of time. So my feet per minute were slower. I was probably riding on harder conditions and things I had to take my time on rather than things that were very easy, groomers that I could just bomb down. I charted the total time that I was on the mountain, and then I was generally, like I said, interested in whether or not I could get my speed up across that across that winter. And so my vertical feet per minute were hanging between 50 and 100 feet per minute on average. And then I got those up to 120 vertical feet per minute. So if you think about where I was increasing roughly 30-40% on my speed. I was accelerating that pretty quickly. Now, interestingly, this culminated in a fantastic day where I had 51,000 vertical feet. Just so you know, an average day for most skiers is about between 8,000 and 10,000 vertical feet. So we were just hauling down the mountain. And I had 132 per minute was my average here, whereas my first day was at 92. I went out the next weekend. We were hauling butt again. Midday, I was at 30,000 and I actually wrecked, had a mild concussion, and I had to take these 2 weeks off per doctor's orders. And I came back slower again. I was nervous to hit my head again. I've actually been a lot more nervous as a result of that. Now, can I turn it on and go that fast? Do I have the skills? I do. Do I do it every single time? No, because this is what happens when you do that. At least that one time. And one time on a brain injury like that, mild if it was, and potential is what it could turn into, that was enough for me. And I learned a pretty valuable lesson here. So these are things that you can learn, things that I've explored when it comes to standard acceleration chart. This isn't exactly how you would measure those sort of things. If you'd like that, there's somebody that I know that teaches that. It's actually two different people, both Amy and Sal, and I'm going to point you towards them in the comment or in the description down below. So yeah, this is the value of standard acceleration charting. I think you can get to a real sense and understanding of your behavior, the world that you're working within, and how it affects your goals and what it is at the end of the day that you want to achieve in life. So hope this is valuable to some of you. I appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe. It actually makes a difference. And if you're really into this sort of stuff, I live, breathe, eat, die this sort of thing. And so patreon.com down here is where you can help support and bring more content like this, get some behind the scenes access, stuff like that. All right. That's your Daily BA.